And I have failed in the mountains. I've come away empty-handed. Expedition's been a disaster. And you think, if I'd have known at the beginning that I was going to fail, would I have done it? And the answer is always yes.
So what made you decide to climb Everest way back then at such a young age?
I went to a lecture about mountaineering and I sat there and listened as the two climbers described how when they got to the summit, it was like a bolt of lightning hit me. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Bonita Norris, the youngest person ever to reach both the summit of Mount Everest and the North Pole.
You know, it always felt impossible until I was finally there. It was thrilling every day. I loved every second of it. There was not a moment where I wanted to give up in some ways. In the beginning, I think one of the reasons I was tempted to go to this lecture about mountaineering, someone told me there would be some hot guys there. I did find the hot man in the end through the mountains.
Today on PSI Love Me, we have the brilliant Bonita Norris, the youngest person ever to reach both the summit of Mount Everest and the North Pole. She'd never climbed a mountain before the age of 20 and then reached the summit of Everest only 2 years later at the ripe old age of 22. Bonita's inspiring story of going from complete beginner to standing on top of Mount Everest and the North Pole within only 2 years is proof of what really is possible with the right mindset. And mindset can be applied to all areas of life, growing a business, dealing with failure, and even going out in the dating world. Since then, she's delivered hundreds of keynote motivational speeches to leading organizations such as Google, Virgin, Rolex, and even the Ministry of Defense. So we're very lucky to have her on the show today to share her wisdom. Welcome, Bonita.
Thank you, Lynda. Thank you for that lovely intro.
So what made you decide to climb Everest way back then at such a young age?
So it really just came out of the blue. I went to a lecture about mountaineering and I sat there and listened as the two climbers described how when they got to the summit, they looked down from the top of Everest and they could see the curvature of the earth beneath them. And it was like a bolt of lightning hit me. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to climb that mountain. I wanted to see that sight.
Wow. And so from making that decision to actually getting to the top of Everest, kind of what were the things that you were doing to make sure that you could get to the top essentially?
So it was about 2 years going from that moment to actually getting to the bottom of Everest. It was, at the time I was at university, I had to finish my degree. I had to get a job, to pay for just the basics of like climbing equipment. It's a very expensive hobby. I had to start, from scratch as a beginner climber on a beginner's climbing course at an indoor climbing wall. And I think really though, when you've got like a very clear goal in mind, and mine was to get to the top of Everest, I just had to work my way backwards. So how do I get to Everest? Well, I've got to climb a slightly smaller mountain. And how do I get to that mountain? Well, I have to climb this mountain. And then you keep going backwards until you realize that, okay, so what do I have to do right now? I had to go to the shop and buy myself a pair of hiking boots so I can go to the first mountain. And that was how I saw it really. It was just like these milestones, these stepping stones. And if I just followed the process, it didn't matter how long it would take, I would get there eventually. So I didn't really have a huge amount of self-belief, but I really believed in the process of like, here's the goal, here's the path. I just have to follow it and try and not overthink it too much. And it worked.
Yeah. And it's all about breaking it down, which can be applied to challenges in life, really. You've got this huge milestone, but if you break it down into smaller steps and bring it all together, then anything's possible, really, with the right mindset and know-how. And what did everyone think back then? They were almost like, oh my God, Bonita, you're absolutely nuts. You're doing your degree, you're bonkers. Like, why not wait a few years?
I think they were the people that knew me really well, like my closest friends, my family, they know what I'm like. And they know that every week I was coming, out with another idea of what I wanted to do when I left uni. So it was just kind of, one friend did even say, well, Bon, like, we can't really take this seriously because it was something else last week. So come on, you do kind of do it. And I think that was maybe part of it. I was obviously searching for something and nothing was sticking. And I guess, when you do find something that is so inspiring and yet so terrifying, and the goal really is like that kick up the bum every morning, like, you have to bring your best self to it to even be able to comprehend it ever being successful. That, I think it just seemed so hard that it actually made me sit up and pay attention to it more. Whereas if it was just like, oh, I want to go, and learn to scuba dive or whatever else was on my bucket list, it just wasn't as big and scary. Whereas Everest was that. And so it kind of brought out the best in me. It made me commit to it and it made me be disciplined. And I think that's maybe why it worked, because it was a really big goal. I remember people saying to me, why not just say the 3 peaks? You haven't even climbed the 3 peaks in the UK. There's that 24-hour challenge. And I thought about it and I was like, that just doesn't excite me. Everest excites me. And I wondered why. And I think it was because it was just such a big challenge. And I think we do love to have a big challenge in life. And that was what it was for me. So yeah, they definitely were confused and thought it would never happen. But for once, I should prove them wrong.
And you talk about the power of, a support group in some of your speeches as well. And you got together a great support group for Everest. What did that consist of?
So I was really lucky. Basically, Facebook was a new thing at the time. And it was like, 2008, 2009. And suddenly all these people that you'd never know how to contact mountaineers, they have Facebook profiles. So I was just being really stalkerish, sending very famous mountaineers Facebook messages, and got talking to some of them and just learned so much just by doing that. And then, got invited to go on expeditions and climbing trips and become part of the community, as it were. And I was just really lucky that I, in the very beginning, I contacted people like Tori James, the first Welsh woman to climb Everest. And I knew that she had climbed Everest with a team comprising of a guy called Kenton Cool, the very famous British mountaineer. Lord Casserly, also, absolutely amazing mountaineer, lives in Canada now. And so I must have gotten lucky, but I think, I still was the sort of weirdo that was contacting these people out of the blue. And I think you do have to do that in the beginning.
Yeah, and be proactive about who you want in your support group at the end of the day. It's not all really down to luck. It's like identifying like who do you want in your tribe, who do you want in your community to get you through this challenge, essentially.
Yeah, and you know what? That I didn't always make the best decisions. There were people that I wished I hadn't climbed with, or I wished I hadn't trusted. But overall, we got there in the end, and the relationships that did work out, I'm still friends. People like this guy called Henry Todd, who's a very legendary logistics manager in the mountains. We still see him after all these years, and he's now in his 70s. So, great lifelong friendships were sort of forged in that early time for me. And that support crew, without them, I just wouldn't be here. It's just as simple as that. They taught me everything I knew that I needed to get to Everest.
And what were some of the defining moments on your expedition? Were there times where I'm like, oh my God, I just can't do this. What am I doing? What have I done?
So on Everest, I would say the overwhelming feeling was just every day was just gratitude. I was waking up before I'd even open my eyes, and you'd hear the mountain around you. You'd hear the gunshot cracks as the glacier was splitting. You'd hear the distant rumble of avalanches. You'd hear the wind. You'd hear the Sherpas talking. And it was just like, I can't believe I'm here. I worked, for 2 years, and every day I felt like I would never get here. It always felt impossible until I was finally there. Just to be on that mountain, it was thrilling every day. I loved every second of it. There was not a moment where I wanted to give up in some ways. And then we got to the sort of summit push when we were going to the top of the mountain. And stupidly, I had gone down from bed. We'd been waiting for our weather window to come in. I'm going to use a lot of technical terms now. So if you think like, what is that? Just in you're wondering what it is, then so will your listeners. But essentially, once we've finished setting up the mountain, acclimatizing on the mountain, we then wait for a weather window, which means low winds. And that usually comes mid-May. So whilst we're waiting, I decided to leave base camp and go down to the valley, lower down, more oxygen, and rest and recoup. But then the call came in pretty quickly, get back to base camp. We're going for the summit. The weather window's here. So in a day, I walked, 20 kilometers back from this village in the valleys up to base camp. And then the next morning, having got there late at night, then chased my team who had left the day before up to Camp 2 on Everest. They then had a rest day, but I didn't because I'd been down.
Wow, you must have been so fit.
So I went from like without a single rest day, I went from 4,800 meters to 8,850 meters, the summit of Everest, in about 4 days. So by the time it got to like summit day, I was broken. I was completely exhausted.
But you do these things when you're young though, don't you? You think you're invincible.
Yeah, but just, it was really bad. Like if I was going to be like leading any team in the mountains today, I would just make sure that they never had to do anything like that, because it was just way too much, even for like a really fit and strong mountaineer, let alone, me who'd only been climbing for 2 years. So it was a massive thing. And I just remember running out of steam basically. And there wasn't a feeling of wanting to give up. It's just, I've got nothing left. And I don't know how, but I managed to get to the top. But then the way back down was really hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. And all the adrenaline of getting to the top. And I can imagine. And how many people did you trek with?
So we started out as a team of 6 foreigners. And then we've got, our Sherpa team, our base camp team. So the actual whole entire team that get you to the top is massive. But in terms of the foreigners coming to the mountain and employing these support crew, we were 6. And then very early on in the expedition, one of the climbers pulled out because he just wasn't fit enough. And secondly, then the only other female on the team, a lovely woman called Lynette from Australia, she also unfortunately got an injury, so she had to leave. So then it was just me and 3 guys going to the summit, very, very strong, strapping lads, and me.
And how soon after Everest did you conquer the North Pole?
So it was the following spring, basically. Yeah.
So you got back from Everest and you were like, right, what's the next thing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, people would say, like, surely you're going to hang up your boots. Like, you can't do anything to top Everest. And actually, I thought, well, hang on. I've got all these cold weather skills, all this ability in these extreme environments. Why would I now waste all of that and never climb or never go on an expedition again? And I really wanted to explore the polar poles because it just seemed less risky. The mountains are so dangerous. And so I just wanted to do an adventure, challenge myself, but do it in a way that hopefully wasn't going to kill me, except for polar bears and, ice. There's the frozen sea ice kind of obviously is melting at a shocking rate. So it was still dangerous. But yeah, I did that the following spring.
Gosh, incredible. And aside to things like, practicing gratitude, what else did you take away from both of those expeditions in terms of mindset that you now apply to your everyday life?
There are so many things. I think the biggest lesson was that we are far more capable than what we think. Genuinely, you'd face up to the biggest mountain on earth, but actually the real mountain was the one in here, because I would find myself fretting, with every sort of painful step on the mountain. Your body is screaming at you to stop because you can't get enough oxygen to your muscles. You can't breathe. Your heart is thumping. I remember my rib cage aching, the muscles in between your ribs. They were so fatigued from being like weeks on end that your whole body is just aches from the effort of trying to breathe, from trying to get oxygen to your muscles. So you start to fret and think, God, this one step is taken so much out of me. And I look up the mountain and it's still the same size. How are we ever going to, I'm never going to get there. Like, this is impossible. And you start to fret, you go into these negative spirals. And I realized that actually the mountain wasn't trying to make me quit. It was what was going on here. So it was a real lesson in stop overthinking, stop fretting. And I had this mantra I would say to myself, focus, not fret. Focus on the next footstep. Focus on anything, but do not fret, because you cannot change anything by fretting. You're just wasting your energy worrying about something that you can't change. So that was probably the mindset that helped me the most. And yeah, that getting to the top of Everest, 22 years old, a girl from Wokingham who had never climbed a mountain, basically, we are all so much more capable than what we think. I was not born an Olympic athlete. I was not born a talented mountaineer. I just had a goal. I put myself out there. I contacted people. I taught myself to climb. I made mistakes. It was embarrassing. I felt like a fraud a lot of the time. But if you're willing to put yourself out there and be exposed and not give up, then you can probably get quite far. And obviously there's a huge amount of luck in climbing Everest. The mountain was always in charge. She could have swatted us off, avalanched us off, at any moment. But you get lucky by showing up, I think. And what we did and what, I did every day was just show up, was just get out of the tent no matter what and climb no matter what. Even when we thought it was futile and that we were, going to fail, we still went and tried. And you get lucky when you show up, and we did. So that's kind of what I learned from
Incredible story. And you're right, we can only control the things that we can control, and things like the mountain and other things in our lives that are out of control. There's no point worrying about them, and just focus on what we can actually change, essentially.
If you love PSI Love Me and want to dive in deeper, then join the Evolve Woman, my 8-week online coaching program, which will take you on a transformative journey of self-discovery, fulfillment, and to find the joy and love you so deserve. Check out my Instagram, Lynda Williams Coach, to find out more.
And so since then, you've been a motivational speaker for years now, and sharing your story and insights into the challenges that you overcame during your expeditions. What made you transition into that? Was that quite soon after you come back from the North Pole? How did you evolve into becoming such a legendary speaker?
I started speaking even before I climbed Everest. I really felt strongly that I wanted to go into like my old school, and I wanted to talk to them about climbing and what I'd learned from it. I was really passionate, and I really I've discovered this amazing hobby of mountaineering and of rock climbing, and I wanted everyone to do it. So I just couldn't wait to go into schools and sort of try and get kids trying, climbing and things like that. And it wasn't, so when I got back from Everest, by the sort of 2015, I was speaking in I'd spoken in about 200 schools over like the preceding 5 years. And so I really honed my craft, made a lot of mistakes, but thankfully made them in front of sort of 15-year-olds. And from that, there came the sort of natural transition of going into speaking in the corporate world. And I've been doing that now for nearly 10 years. I started doing that in 2015. So yeah, it delivers 650 speeches. And I think with every single one, you learn something new. So definitely the talk I give today is not the same one as I was giving when I was 22 in any way at all, actually. But it's important for me, I am telling a true story. So there's so much that can and can't be changed. But actually it's about trying to just relate it to modern times. So I think that's kind of job as a speaker. And I've always found it, I get nervous, of course, but I've always been drawn to it. I've always loved sharing this story and how amazing the mountains are. So it just seemed like a very natural thing to do.
Yeah. And it's incredible to be able to share that. I bet when you got back, you must have been proud of yourself. You're like, yeah, 22-year-old me can do this. I want to share my story and how I overcame the challenges along the way. And it's such a simple but powerful message to share that can be related to other areas of your life.
I guess, but I don't want it to sort of come across as like I wasn't proud of myself. I wouldn't say that was the feeling. It was just like, I felt like I'd discovered this amazing thing. That was how it began, really. And some people love doing the school plays at school. Some people are just born enjoying being on stage. I'm really an introvert mostly in everyday life, but I love going up on stage.
And so how do you prepare for that? From my own experience as well, when you're on stage, it takes up quite a lot of your energy as well. And it can be quite exhausting, kind of delivering speeches week in, week out. What do you do for self-care and to kind of wind down after each week?
So the biggest self-care tool I've learned is to not wish it away. Because our speaking is really stressful. It's a massively high pressure job. You have got something like 30 or 40 minutes to, ideally from, the CEO or the leader's standpoint, they want you to deliver serious impact that's going to take their team not just through that day, but through the following weeks and months. So you have got to make an outsized impact in a really small amount of time. They've got their message that they want you to convey through this story that you're telling. And there's so much to remember when you go on stage. It's not just the same thing I'm banging out every time. Every talk is bespoke pretty much, but still following the same stories of my experiences from different climbs in the mountains. And so it's incredibly stressful. And I got into a rut, I think, of thinking, when this one is over, I'm going to quit this. I can't wait till Friday night and have that big glass of wine. And actually, I realized that wasn't really serving me, that mindset of wishing it away. When I sort of forced myself to think, is it really that bad? Is there nothing that I can take from this moment that I can actually enjoy? I started to look at what I was doing and think, wow, like what a privilege to have that pressure. What an amazing experience to go up on stage and sort of be tested in this way. And even when it's going bad, like because I give 70 speeches a year, not all of them are going to be the best speech I've ever given. Some days you do have off days. When that is happening, I can just tell that I'm just sort of slightly out of kilter and haven't like hit my mark as I'd want to. I'm just sort of thinking to myself, don't wish it away. Like, just learn from this moment. And I think that has been the biggest transformation for me. It's like with the pressure, with stress, just always find something to be thankful for. Just enjoy. It's not always going to be perfect. I think another thing, the way that helped me prepare is, as a woman, my hormones fluctuate week to week. And I do have weeks of the month where it is harder for me to recall names, words. It sounds silly, but, you sort of multiply that with like 9 months of pregnancy that I've been through twice as speaker. Brain fog is a real thing. And I used to be like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why am I gone shit suddenly? And then actually on reflection, it's like, be kind to yourself. You're going through these different fluctuations because you're a woman. And so now I can kind of anticipate when those moments are going to be where, I'm maybe going to be a bit more brain foggy this day, or this day I should be on fire. And, or this day, like, give yourself a break, be kind to yourself. It's not going to be the easiest one. That's helped monumentally. Yeah.
I agree. And I think we beat ourselves up way too much. We're not robots at the end of the day. And especially women in business, when you're self-employed, when you're running a company, there's all sorts of things get thrown your way. And it's just showing up and doing your best. And as you said before, enjoying the journey and enjoying the process. That good old saying of, happiness is a journey, not a destination. And I actually apply that to work as well. Like when I've been building all my new coaching platforms, younger me would have just been rushing, let's get something out there. But me now, I'm just taking my time, enjoying it and being present in each moment and learning from myself as well, like how I'm feeling and what's coming up. And as you say, being kinder to yourself when you need to rest. You rest, don't quit.
I love that. And, something that I was in kind of a room last week in Paris, corporate firm, and someone stood up and said, my philosophy is kind perseverance. Or like, I'm kind to myself, kind enough so that I can persevere. And I thought, I love that. That's exactly how I was really when I was climbing Everest, or I'm approaching any mountain, or pressurized speech is just, be kind to yourself. Like, this is really hard. Recognize that fact. Give yourself a break. It's not the end of the world. You're amazing. Go and do it. And it's that kind perseverance, I think.
Absolutely. And just putting one step in front of the other when you're really not feeling up to it, and just having that mindset to say, you got this, one step in front of the other. Going back to your analogy of, climbing Everest again, and all that training you put together is breaking it all down, and just small bites make a whole challenge essentially. And tell me a little bit more about your personal life, because you're married with 2 young kids.
I am. So, in the beginning, I think one of the reasons I was tempted to go to this lecture about mountaineering, something that was so out of anything I'd ever, thought about in my life, was one of the reasons I was dragged there was because someone told me there would be some hot guys there. But I did find the hot man in the end through the mountains.
How did you meet your husband?
So we met on a climbing trip,
a
rock climbing trip in Greece, and it was pretty much love at first sight, really. But the funny thing about that was I was actually running rock climbing holidays. I was hiring the sort of famous rock climbers and then getting them to coach other climbers, and these climbers will pay to be coached by these kind of celebrities. And it was setting up this business was pretty much the stressful losing sleep experience of my life. We started it in January. We sort of ran the first one in October. So 10 months of just like, how are we going to find clients? There was so much wrong. I'd never set up a business before. So I was in tears a lot. But we got there, and we got the enough clients to run the holiday, though we made zero money. In fact, it probably made a loss, but I didn't ever really do the accounts because I'm just new to how horrendous they've been. It cost me money, my own personal money, to run this. And you kind of would think, well, that sounds like a huge failure. But I met my husband on that holiday. There's a funny thing in life, isn't there? When you're not looking for it, that's when it comes. And when you actually put all your energy into something completely different, and ostensibly it fails, but actually it succeeded in a way that was far more important. So life is just really weird like that.
No, I absolutely agree. And when you're kind of in your game and your cup's fill and you've got that sparkle in your eye, that's when you do attract like-minded energy and people. And I think I've noticed that in my life, not just with the relationship side of things, but it could be business partners or friendships. When you're in your own flow and you're being 100% you and doing the things that you love, you'll naturally have a higher energy and attracting the right things. And I also say this to women when they're out there dating. It's not just the apps, but join groups, do things that fill your cup up, whether it's joining the local tennis club or finding a new park to walk your dog. You might find other like-minded dog walkers, or like you with your climbing trips. It's broadening your areas of interest and finding like-minded people, because you just never know who may show up that day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so true. I've always, luckily I kind of found him before like apps were a huge thing. I have friends on the apps, and I think it sounds exciting and thrilling, but also quite relentless.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah. But, I would always encourage, like, I'm just a broken record, but I'd really encourage everyone to start climbing, because I do think that's just the best way to meet people. So if you're not already and you haven't tried it, definitely go and try it. It's a kind of democratized, like, you turn up to climb indoors or wherever, and you're standing there with someone who's 14 years old, and then you've got some guy that's in his 30s or 40s. And then you're just it's just a big mix. You've got grandmas, and there's someone for everyone. I've made so many friends, and obviously met my husband through this way. So that would be my tip.
And how do you manage your life? Obviously, you have a busy job week on week with your keynote speeches, and you've got 2 very young children. How do you manage to balance all the books?
I would say I don't balance it very well. I do put myself last. I've got a 5-year-old, a 1-year-old. I'm doing sort of 75 speeches a year. Often they're overseas as well. So I am away a lot. And there's so much I want to be doing. I love climbing. I love the exercise. I love looking after myself. I can just see how this year is just like gone like that. I think it's really hard. Like, I've really not been able to find that balance. And a lot of parents I've spoken to have just said, yeah, just kind of keep, when you're in hell, keep going. You've got 2 really young children. You just have to get through this time. It does get easier. So I'm trying, as I said to you already, like, I'm trying not to wish it away. I'm trying to be kind to myself and say, this isn't going to be the time when you're running marathons and, getting up to do yoga at sunrise and things like that, like I used to. This is going to be a time for your children, and actually you'll never get this time back. So you're not going to have a hot body when you're 80 anyway, but you will have some good memories. And so that's kind of how I'm getting my head around it. But yeah, balance is tough. I think my health has definitely suffered. And that's just being honest. I think, it's being that you don't want to sacrifice your career, you don't want to sacrifice time with your children, but it doesn't end up being often that you sacrifice time for yourself. And I do have to remind myself that actually there are very small things that I could be doing that would make my life infinitely better, like taking my supplements and just having a really nice skincare routine in the evening. But I'm just like, wash my face, sat something on and just go to bed. Actually, when I do spend time like looking after myself, I feel so much better for it. And it is the little things that make the big difference. But honestly, when you are exhausted, it's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just getting through the day, as you say. And it's quite often, because I'm the same, I try to be healthy. I take my supplements, eat nutritious foods, I exercise. But then when life gets busy, or especially when you travel, your routine gets out of sync. And then you've got jet lag, and then you haven't taken all your supplements with you, and then you get out of sync. And then you get sick, and then it's like, all right, okay, get back on the bandwagon of being healthy again. So
which is then harder because you take so much time off.
I know, and then you start beating yourself around with a stick because you haven't been looking after yourself, and it can get a bit of a revolving circle, really, when you're trying to cope with everything, get through work, support your family, and also support yourself. So we don't always have it perfect, do we?
No, we don't. I think the focus has got to be on, remembering that the small things do make us feel good. I tell myself in the evening when I put the kids to bed, just do one press up. Just do one press up. And then you can watch TV all night. But if I'm down for I've done one, I'm going to try and, do 10 or whatever. And then if I've done 10 press ups, I'll get my kettlebell out and I'll start that. So James Clear, the guy that wrote Atomic Habits.
Oh yeah, James Clear, yeah.
Yeah, he says, just floss one tooth. Like that's the philosophy. So, you never want to floss your teeth. But if you just tell yourself, do one tooth, you'll always do your whole mouth. The anticipation of doing something is worse than actually doing it. If I was to sort of think, I'm going to put the kids to bed, then I'm going to do a half an hour workout, I'd be like, no, I'm going to watch TV. But just by saying I'm just going to do one press up, it gets me going. And I think that's probably been my saving grace, if anything, this year, is just when I get into that mindset, it does save me. And then it is, as he says in his book, it's atomic habits. So these small things that you do then have a rippling effect through the rest of your day. So if I've done a half an hour workout, I'm then not going to sit on the sofa and drink wine because I feel sanctimonious. And so that has a knock-on effect. So it really is, I think, as like busy working women as we are, it's just like being able to not trick yourself, but like, just as he says, just floss one tooth, like that can actually have a rippling outsized impact on your day. And it's just what I've got to remember, really.
Yeah, it's such a great tip. I'm the same. I'm forever trying to be a good runner, and I hate running. I love other fitness. I love cycling, yoga, all the rest of it, but I'm always trying to make myself run. So whether it's on the treadmill or out by the sea here, I do what you say, like, okay, I'm just going to do 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers. And by the time I'm finished, I've managed to do 5 kilometers. And it's like, oh, well, that wasn't actually that bad. And then the next time I'll do a little bit more. I'll beat last time just by 0.5 kilometer. So you're right. Again, it's all about breaking these challenges or the anticipation of what we need to get done, just breaking it all down into bite-sized pieces and just take that first small step. And the rest of it ain't that bad sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely the only method, that works for me. Joe Wicks says the motivation comes after. And I think that's so true.
That's so true. And people think you have to be motivated to do the thing, to do that project at work, to, do that challenge, but it's actually afterwards. And people seem to forget that. So you actually just got to get going, whatever you're doing in life.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's so true. It's a good reminder for us both. We do it, but we also forget to do it.
I know a lot of the time, I'm a coach, and you don't listen to your own advice half the time, and your friends or your partner have to remind you. You're like, yeah, practice what you preach, girl. So what do you have planned for next year? Have you got quite a busy start with your speaking gigs?
I do. It's actually sort of gone a bit crazy, which is great. I think a woman, probably my biggest challenge next year is going to be stepping into embrace, trying to put my fees up. I know that I definitely don't charge as much as my male counterparts, and I feel when I'm as good as them, but I know paid more because I found out on the grapevine what they're charging. I'm like, hang on a minute, what? And it's this thing where, the gender pay gap, obviously we know it exists, but legally, if you're part of a big corporate firm, then hopefully there's some sort of things in place to help make sure that you are paid the same as your peers. But if you're self-employed, you're setting your own rates. And, my husband runs his own business as well. And when he hires people, he says, well, what's your day rate? Inevitably, women will ask for like 2/3 or half of what men who are qualified in exactly the same way. And maybe the women are more exceptional candidates, but they will still ask for less. So my challenge to myself next year, and this isn't about being greedy or focusing on money. It's just about having the confidence to ask for what other people seem to find easy to ask for.
Yeah, it's that worth, isn't it? And that value. We've all been there, and asking for what we're worth as women, we do dumb it down quite a lot.
Yeah. And I just think because it's all wrapped up in a mindset of coming from a place of fear, that we'll lose work if we put our fees up. We want to people please. We want to feel we're the best value for money. So for me, it's about trying to unravel a lot of that thinking that I've just kind of gone along with for years. I wanted to be the best value speaker. I wanted people to go, oh my God, we should have paid her loads more money. Well, actually now maybe I'm at that point where I should be.
And you've more than proved yourself. More.
Yeah, and that goes to show you see that same thing, isn't it, of women and men on CVs and how many tick boxes you have to have ticked before you apply for the job. I feel like I've gotten to the point where I've ticked every box before I'm now ready to go, okay, maybe I'm worth more than one charging.
Absolutely.
Whereas, probably my male counterparts. And I am totally stereotyping here, and this is a very blanket statement, but I think maybe men are quite happy to just dive into the speaking world and have higher fees. So there's just a lot of maybe not inner work, but just definitely unraveling the kind of stories that I still tell myself. And so I wouldn't say that's a resolution or anything like that, but it's just definitely something for that I'm trying to get my mind into, which is quite scary for me. And how about you, Lynda? What's the goal?
Well, I'm launching this podcast in January, so that is going to be full on, and I've got 2 new coaching programs. So I've got a lot of launches in January, February next year, which is really exciting. And I've been here before, actually, with, I used to run a PR agency in Singapore, and I've been in startup mode more than once. So it is that mindset when it sometimes feels like such a slog. And when you're working on your own as well, it can feel a bit lonely and isolating. Even though I've got a virtual team, I haven't got that in-person team around me anymore to have that camaraderie and that energy. But I do remind myself, I've been here before, I can do this. Just break it all down into small little pieces and it will all come together. So no, I'm excited to get it out of the gates. I'm excited for this podcast and my coaching programs, and I've really enjoyed putting them together. Actually, I've actually done loads and loads of research. I've spoken to lots of people, which younger me would have been a bit scared to share my ideas or what will people think. But this time I've just really, luxuriated in all the conversations and learning and finding out what people want these days. Because, as you do in your speeches, you have to kind of tweak and change it depending on what the environment is, what workplace you're delivering it to, what's happening in the world right now. It's pretty volatile out there with the politics, with wars. It's a pretty nuts world out there right now. So just having that kind of flexibility and open-mindedness to change as you need to, I think is really, really important as we get through each week, month, year, is just to be open-minded and flexible as in terms of what's happening around us. So, yeah.
That's good for you. Good for you. I didn't know that you'd run all these businesses in the past. That's amazing. What will you do differently this time? What have you learned?
I've learned to delegate a lot of the stuff that I'm not great at. So And also not do things in a shoestring anymore. Like, come on. Like for this podcast, for instance, I've got Alex helping me, and I've got a virtual team, and I'm part of some other coaching programs that helps me be the best, and just investing in quality people, consultants, technology, and just doing it properly. And I think, and also taking my time as well. Younger me was just like, rush it and get it out there just for the sake of getting it up. But if you have to delay something to make it a little bit better, not in the perfectionist type of thing, like, because sometimes you just need to get it done, but just taking my time and doing the proper research to make sure it's really viable for the market and it's going to really impact people, essentially. So, and I also ran with my PR agency. I set up this online wellbeing site called The Soothe in the middle of COVID because my team were really quiet. They were still working more or less full time. And so I set up this online wellness magazine, essentially. And I didn't have the right people on the commercial side of that to make it viable. I just wanted to create impact in Singapore when mental health was at an all-time low. I had one of my close friends who's an amazing editor. She launched Cosmopolitan in Singapore. She used to work for some big newspaper titles in London and Dubai. And so we just had loads of fun, and I interviewed tons and tons of wellness professionals. But I learned that things actually have to be commercially viable. Like you were talking about your first climbing trips and stuff, that you just kind of throw it all together out of sheer passion. But sometimes like it actually has to be commercially viable as well. And it learned, and I did lose money on it for sure. And it taught me like passion isn't always key. It actually has to kind of pay the bills as well. So, but I don't regret it because I learned so much. 3 years of running that. I learned so much of business, but all the people I interviewed and got to guest edit, and in the wellness world, I met some incredible psychologists and nutritionists and people on all ends of the world who taught me so much. So I had an absolute blast doing it. But yeah, you live and learn, don't you? You fail, but as that saying goes, I think it's Stephen Bartlett who said this: failure is feedback, feedback is knowledge, and knowledge is power. So you just got to have a go. And if you're not failing, you're not trying. So just got to throw yourself in there and have a go at the end of the day. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I just remember, there were so many times in the mountains where we thought and I have failed in the mountains. I've come away empty-handed. Expedition's been a disaster. And you think, God, if I'd have known at the beginning that I was going to fail, would I have done it? And the answer is always yes. It's always like, yeah, I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah, because you learn so much. You learn so much about yourself, what you do next time. It's, without action, we're never going to learn and we're never going to excel.
The problem is now, like when I'm starting a project, I'm thinking, well, what if it comes to nothing? Then it's a waste of time. And then I've just invested all my time. I haven't got that much time. So maybe I just won't do this because I'm probably going to fail. But you've got to remind ourselves, haven't we, that actually we have failed and we've never thought it was a waste of time. There's always something unexpected that you could never have imagined you would learn or gain from it, that, is worth the effort. So it's just like our relationship with failure is so funny, isn't it?
Yeah, it's mad actually. And so many of, the key motivational speakers and the coaches out there, they all say is that failure is essential in life. We have to fail to learn and to succeed. No one gets it right the first time around, or at least they're not sharing any failures. So
no, of course. I mean, yeah, I've had some pretty horrendous failures in the mountains, and always they have sparked, been a real eye opener. I've been like, whoa, that was a real blind spot for me. Now I can see what I need to work on, and then have gone on to kind of push myself and try even harder expeditions that have been successful, but I would never have been motivated to do them if I had plain sailing, got to the top of all these peaks, because I think failure really does put a fire in your belly. I do hear a lot of these motivational speakers also saying that you'll never be motivated by negatives, like failure, for instance, like fear. I've always felt like, well, hang on, like that's how I get myself up in the morning. It's like fear of failure, or having had a failure, and that failure kind of driving me to be wanting to be better. Well, actually, for me, when everything is like easy and plain sailing, you get comfortable, don't you? And
absolutely. And sometimes a bit complacent, and it's like easy cruising and yeah, we got this. But you're right. You're on your A game when things are going a bit south and you're like, ooh, got to pull a few stops out here.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely proudest moments in the mountains have been after really dark places, that I've pulled myself back out from and learned from. And they are so much more richer experiences because of that. So yeah, for sure. And it's sort of inspiring me talking about it now that I've got this project in mind and I really have to buckle down on it next year. I'm sort of, putting it off because I'm convinced I don't have time and that it's going to be a waste of time because I'm going to fail. But actually I do need to just get on with it, don't I?
Start.
Yeah.
Do that first step. Well, you've shared so many amazing insights and tips on the episode today. And as we wrap up, I'd love you to share 3 things with our listeners that will help them feel fabulous, fulfilled, and even find love.
For me, I would just say when it comes to love, put yourself out there in all different ways. Take risks in different ways. Put yourselves in, all kinds of situations. My 2 other tips would be focus, not fret. Focus on something small that you can do. Don't fret about things that are out of your control. And lastly, I think going on from our last bit of our conversation, don't be afraid to fail. Because actually, as we've chatted about, you get some of the juiciest stuff in life from messing up.
Awesome tips. Well, Bonita, thank you so much for taking time out of your last week of the year. And I'm excited to see what's next for you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of PSI Love Me. I hope you've learned some interesting nuggets to weave into your everyday life to feel a little lighter, brighter, and inspired. If you loved today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps more high-achieving women like yourselves to find us. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Lynda Williams Coach, for more daily inspiration and updates.